Okay, I have right at 11 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And as others continue to join this community, we will welcome them in. But I am Dr. Nika White. I am the host of Intentional Conversations, a virtual community chat that we do weekly, every Friday from 11 to 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And I want to just share a couple thoughts with you before we jump in and introduce our special guest co-host today. So go to the next slide for me, please, Anna. So I want to make sure that you all know how to connect with me. We like to continue these conversations beyond just the time that we spend together in this hour. And so I am on all social media platforms. I encourage you to follow me on Twitter at Nika White, on Facebook, which we're live right now at Nika White Consulting, Instagram at Nika C. White, and then on LinkedIn at Dr. Nika White. And I also want to encourage each of you to, when you get an opportunity, spend some time to go and hop over to our website at nikawhite.com. We are a full service diversity, equity, and inclusion management consulting firm where we intersect the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. There are lots of great resources that are complimentary on our website to help those who are interested in leading inclusively. And so I encourage you to go out there, nikawhite.com. I always like to give a little bit of information about what you can expect for the next intentional conversation. And I am so super excited for August 7th because we will be welcoming my friend Victoria Russell out of Louisville, Kentucky. She is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Papa John's. And we're going to talk about what it means to be a corporate activist, what it's like to be a woman of color in corporate America, and also how Papa John's is navigating the global pandemic and the racial inequity crisis. So I hope that you'll join us next week for Victoria Russell. And then following that Friday, we also have another wonderful speaker that's going to be joining as a guest co-host. Her name is Dr. Janice Gassam, and on August 14th, she's going to be joining us, and we're going to speak about how to foster inclusive workplaces and the importance of belonging. And so I cannot wait for you to be introduced to Janice. She is going to have some incredible stories and insights to share with us. And so I want to give you all an opportunity. We've been doing this now for several months, and we've had some tremendous guests, and I know that there's still lots of other people out there that perhaps I do not know, but that you know of that would make for a great co-host. And so I want to just invite you to share with us. If you know of any potential guest co-hosts that you would like to see share with this community, perhaps it's yourself or maybe it's someone else, please reach out to us. You can email me at Nika, at Nika, at nikawhite.com, and we would love to consider those recommendations. So thank you in advance. I also want to acknowledge right now one of my teammates who is assisting in the capacity of helping to advance our slides and make sure we're admitting people into our Zoom room, and I'm watching the chat closely. And so that's Anna Viola. She serves as the Chief of Staff of Nika White Consulting. And so thank you so much, Anna. I appreciate you for being here. So let's jump into why we're here today, intentional conversation. So as we go to the next slide, I want to remind each of you that this is all about community. We are committed to optimizing this virtual community space so that we all can walk away, emerge stronger by having spent this hour together. And so please partner with us to keep a couple agreements and considerations in mind throughout our time together as we hold space for each other. And I'm going to share those agreements with you now. If you're not sharing, please remain on mute. This helps us to avoid background noise disruption and make sure that, again, we're optimizing the experience for all. We will invite you at different points and times throughout today to unmute yourself and to share with this audience as we strive to learn with and from each other. Although the topics are going to vary, and they do week to week, what connects every single one of these virtual community chats is the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion with leadership and business. And so while we're going to certainly respect what's top of mind right now as we all are navigating the complexities of the global pandemic as well as the racial injustice crisis, the conversation may go into different directions. I also want you to see this as an opportunity for dynamic knowledge to be transferred as we provide a path to action, making sure that each of us, again, are walking away with something that's fruitful as we try to propel ourselves to the next level. Leverage the chat room for sharing any resources, your contact information. Those LinkedIn links would be great to place there. Ask your questions and introduce yourselves. And last but not least, just to share that our Zoom sessions are being recorded. This is a way for us to extend this information to a larger audience, and it's going to be shared this afternoon with each of you that registered, along with the transcript of the chat. Now, it does me such great pleasure to introduce my guest co-host for today. He's not a stranger to those of us who are in the upstate of Greenville, South Carolina, or South Carolina, upstate of South Carolina in general, of which Greenville was a part of. But this community is not just for folks that are in the local market in which we are based. We have people from all over. And so I am so excited to introduce JDew, his stage name, but we also know him around these parts as Jeremiah Dew. Unless he taps our hand and say, no, it's JDew, call me JDew. But I want to give him a proper introduction before I give him the chance to come on and greet this audience. And so JDew is an MC, an entertainer, and entrepreneur in Greenville, South Carolina. His one-man theater experience is called One Voice. It's a Black history stage or virtual experience showcasing the words of influential African Americans from the 1820s through the present day, including Frederick Douglass, Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama, and of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so let's go ahead and stop sharing the screen so we can bring Jeremiah Dew, JDew, up front and center. We are in for a treat today, and I know it's going to be quite lively because he does not know how to show up any other way but lively. And so, JDew, just greet this audience.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me and see me well. It's morning when we're taping this live, so Friday at 11 o'clock. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Nika, Anna, and the rest of the staff who've decided to put me on today. Hopefully I can keep your attention and keep you awake for the next few minutes. As Dr. White said, most people in the upstate of South Carolina community would know me in public for a few things in terms of entertainment, sports entertainment, pep rallies, fundraisers, and other hosting opportunities. We're going to be able to dive into some of the other, maybe a little bit lesser known things that I do in the community for diversity, inclusion, and equity. And I'm so glad to be here today from home, trying to navigate COVID. And fortunately, the family has left for the beach. So there's going to be no naked kids jumping on me during that. Maybe I'll see it in you guys, in your videos. But it's just me today, so thank you so much, Dr. White, for having me.
I was so hoping to be able to see the naked kids kind of running around because it just seems like make for such a fun time. Your kids are adorable. We're going to talk about family dynamics and bring your family into the conversation a little bit later. But let's just jump right in first with helping this community to understand what is this One Voice, this show all about, what inspired it, and what can we see in terms of how in which you have pivoted this show, which normally is presented live during this time of COVID. So let's talk about One Voice.
One Voice, a Black history narrative, is a theater experience, as Dr. White said, and it is a journey through 180 years of Black American history through the narrative of several character voices. And so you'll see me as the performer, the one-man show, one voice, one man. There's nobody else to blame it on. It's just me on stage. So if something goes wrong, it's my fault. But for the last 10 years, I've do this experience about 100 different times, churches, civic groups, a bunch of schools, higher education down to the little kids. And what we're doing is the actual words of Frederick Douglass, MLK, Martin Luther King, James Weldon Johnson, the author of the Black National Anthem, Muhammad Ali, Barack Obama. So I come out on stage as those characters. You don't hear commentary from me. You'll have to get the commentary today over the course of the next hour. But what you do hear is the actual words, the actual political speeches, the actual poems, sermons from these characters. And it takes you on a journey from then till now, as we can imagine, that goes from bleak and very not so great times for Black Americans and people of color, all the way till about now, we'll call it modern day, around the time Barack Obama was doing his campaigning for the presidential office. And so during that time, we're going on an emotional and narrative and historical timeline journey through these characters. There's a lot of video that puts these things together and introduces to you why these people are important or what they said or what they did. And it also gives me a chance to go backstage and change clothes, and come out as the next character. So yes, I do the I Have a Dream speech, word for word, from memory. It comes out and I perform it as MLK, and the audience gets to be there like they were at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 for the very first time. So that's basically what One Voice is. And yeah, and we'll jump into more questions about that. I'm sure, Dr. White, you have some about what it is, but kind of how it's changed and morphed
Yeah.
in 2020.
Well, exactly. And let's go directly there because now we're in this global pandemic and you just can't sit on the stage necessarily or stand on a stage and have an audience full of people that are proximate to each other. And so, how have you pivoted to make sure that we're continuing to educate and bring this wonderful experience to different communities?
Great question. So, and I see Natasha there. I love it that your family was there. Your great aunt was there. I've been able to present this in front of just a handful of people who were at that original Dr. King, oration for the March on Washington in 1963. Yeah. So 2020 has hit all of us, has it not? And how things have morphed and changed this year. I normally get really busy during the MLK holiday proper time, mid-January through February, Black History Month. So during that 6 to 8 weeks, I am super busy doing my show live. This year was no different because we went into pandemic quarantine, proper 2 weeks after February, the Black History Month. So as we are pivoting and moving toward a new normal, whatever that is in 2020 and beyond, yeah, things have got to change. So as you can imagine, if you remember being in elementary school or you work in those environments, we got all the kids in the multipurpose room and the gyms and the cafeterias and toriums sitting together, right? And so that's not really what we're doing now. Churches are meeting outside, they're meeting online. And so there's a lot of different things that have had to happen. Well, for 10 years, you had to be in the room with me. So if I'm not in the room coming out and curtains opening, you're not hearing me. So a lot of folks saw me at their corporate event, their corporate diversity inclusion event. And we're not doing those the same way anymore. So what I pivoted to, and the new episode that hit us all in 2020 in June was the George Floyd and everything around that. Right? So we went from World War III to murder hornets to Kobe Bryant to all of a sudden I was homeschooling my kids and then the unfortunate circumstances of Minneapolis, Atlanta, and all over the world. So at that time, what I decided to do, there was a lot of people in what I would call the dominant culture, the majority community. Now, I have no doctorate, so you have to ask Nika what you're supposed to say, but I'll say the majority community, the dominant culture, started to reach out to me. And they said, hey, whatever you're involved in, we want to know, or I'm sorry, you may be going through some things right now, or wow, I didn't understand. I think I understand more or better. Let us know if you're up to something. So I was getting a bunch of, I was fielding a lot of information like that. And at first, which we might get into, I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what had changed about the dominant community during June, the early days of June. I was like, why are people reaching out to me? And I hit up other Black people, people like Dr. White. I think I texted her at one time, family members, like, hey, what's going on with them, right? I don't get it. But at that time, I decided to launch into a new opportunity for Juneteenth. There was many of the people, the majority dominant community, who were learning of this or recalibrating their thoughts around this holiday experience. And I said, you know what, that was about 2 weeks after, 2-3 weeks after the George Floyd incidents and marches and riots and everything was going on. And I said, why don't I do a virtual online experience? So I did that. It was the very first time. So once again, there's nobody to blame it on. So you got to put all, hands on deck to figure out how to make something work. And we had a beautiful sponsored event, online event through YouTube that did some of my entire show, but there were some nuances and changes as well. So we called it One Voice, Black and Blue. Obviously, Black and Blue gives us a thought connotation for, trauma or, getting a fight with somebody in 5th grade or something like that. But also Black and Blue reference the skin color as well as the blue of the police, right? So One Voice, Black and Blue was this event on June 19th. Got a lot of sponsorship, including including a senator who's from my area in Greenville, who just happened to be acquainted with him. We've been acquaintances for a long time. He became a senator a few years ago. I'm sorry, a House rep a few years ago. And he flew me, I had to take some guys. So he ended up driving up to DC and I did the King speeches, 2 of which I do. The Dream speech as well as the Mountaintop speech. the one that Dr. King gave the night before he was assassinated. I did those from the Monuments Mall area in DC. So it was a very beautiful scene. And we put those things together, put the show together, and became a virtual online experience. About 500 or so people watched it live between our broadcast June 19th and a replay that we did. And we changed the game because folks that were not able to be in the room with me or had seen it before, wanted to be able to be in the comfort and safety of their own home, were able to watch and experience that. So it's opened up a new opportunity for me to do some stuff online, for people to be able to see that rebroadcast, for me to be able to package things in a different way, because we did some stuff in studio, we did stuff live on location to record, and it's just a new opportunity in the new normal that we have in 2020. So the other big piece was we added some commentary for the first time in 10 years. You know, all the time I'm able to get on Q&A sessions, maybe like this, maybe with the kids at school or even a college situation, where after my show, after the curtain call and bow, I'm able to field the questions. And inevitably there's going to be questions on, man, how long in the world did it take you to memorize that Frederick Douglass stuff? You know, I'll get those questions. I'll get, you know, like, from the kids, they'll ask me stuff like, are you really Martin Luther King? You know, they'll ask things like that, right? We navigate that. But also, that's the time where I'm able to give some historical perspective, not a necessarily a cultural perspective of modern day, not necessarily a personal political opinion. What I'm able to do is give a historical context to what was going on. And the question that I ask at the end of One Voice, and the question that you'll have if you ever get an opportunity to see it, is, what do you need to do with your one voice to affect positive change in your community, your home, your school, your neighborhood? That's really the question. These men and some women that are in the videos that I show, they were asking themselves what to do with their one voice at their time to fight hate, discrimination, fear, prejudice, whatever those things were. That's what they chose to do. So now the question for all of us, even in today, here as we meet July and August of 2020, is what are you going to do? What should you say? What is your one voice? And so that's how we've navigated things. But the second half, as I mentioned, for a brief second, the second half of this One Voice Black and Blue series was a sit-down conversation, a Q&A that I curated from members of the community, sponsors, and other people I know to ask our local sheriff. Greenville County, where I live, northwestern South Carolina, has a new sheriff. He was in the seat for about 90 days, voted in special election. And as soon as he went into office, we went into pandemic. So there's many things that this man is navigating with. And him as a white man was able to talk through some of the things that I was asking him that the community wanted to know. I even got several law enforcement officers inside his community to field to have a few questions fielded by him as well. And he just answered long form. So it was not a debate. It was not an argumentative session. And that was the second half of our One Voice program this time. So in the future, there's opportunities now for corporate groups, and there's already been some corporate groups to now have my show, and everybody watches it from the private of their own Zoom. Do a Q&A afterward, working on some stuff for school-aged folks as well, where they can see my show in a 90-minute format, a 60-minute format, a Q&A format like this afterward, all sorts of great things. And we have to adjust and pivot, or else we, crash and burn over here. I got these kids I got to feed, right? So it's still an opportunity for all of us to learn, to listen, and to field long-form conversation and potentially debate to help navigate the questions that we all have starting today.
Yeah, that was so good. Thank you so much for giving us all of that context. And there's so much I want to unpack with a lot of what you shared. First thing is, I'm so glad that you were able to pivot, simply because not only is it entertaining, because you're an entertainer and you're just, one of those people that people, like to see entertained, right? But then also there's this huge and incredible educational component to your work, right? And I know there's a lot of conversations being had around how do we continue or even start for some places to make sure that our kids are really fully exposed to African American history, because we are finding that they're not getting that necessarily from the school system. And so we want to make sure that there are some opportunities for kids and adults alike to be able to understand that historical context that you have brought up, and that is very much a part of the One Voice show that you do. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is so important, and I'm going to have you to put this into the chat because I want to open up this question at some point later in our hour together today to this community to answer as they feel led to, and that is, what do you need to do, or what should you do with your one voice? So I want y'all to think about your one voice, and we're gonna ask that question of this community and get some of you to share. And then you talked about, of course, when George Floyd's death occurred, you received an influx of inquiries and requests from different types of organizations. And I've been telling people time and time again that, yeah, DEI practitioners and anyone that has a message that is close to any type of delivery around diversity, equity, and inclusion, racial inequity, systemic racism, they're being inundated right now just with calls and the need to want to tap their brains for their expertise to help them navigate this. And so I get it, and I'm not surprised that you received a lot of calls, but you did bring to the surface today the acknowledgement that George Floyd's death, while racism has been in place now for 400 plus years, right? It may look slightly different, but it's still very much a part of the systems and the institutions that are here. I do agree with you, JDew, in that George Floyd's death, it created this reaction that I think was different, perhaps, than what we have been exposed to in the past. That now is finding people that perhaps have not been a part of the conversation to find it fit to be a part of the conversation, to even initiate the conversation. So why do you think that people are taking such greater notice right now in a more deliberate way? And I suspect that it has something to do with George Floyd and how his story was so up front and center, but just want to hear your reactions on that.
I asked the same question that you're asking me to 100 other people. And so first off, I didn't know exactly what is different, because I think when you're coming from it from a systemic and a very long historical viewpoint. So I'm not talking about personal feelings. I'm talking about just a long form historical viewpoint from the Black community. You see, for African Americans, people, descent from Africans who are in this country, this is not new information, right? Racism, prejudice, police brutality, it's just not new. So I was wondering, many of you possibly were wondering as well, what in the world is different? Now, I honestly, as scary and as horrible and as grief-inducing as the situation was to watch any part of the George Floyd, breathing issue right there and the death, right? To watch that right before he dies in the hospital or in custody of the police, is terrible, but it just wasn't new. We've all seen violent films and things like that. And we've all, most of the people, as I look at some of your beautiful faces here, we're all old enough to remember Rodney King even, right? That was kind of the first one of police brutality that I remember. I lived in Southern California at the time. I'm 6 years old, 7 years old, something like that. I'm just like, so what's different this time? Why are people reaching out to me? And these were people who in some context knew me in terms of entertainment, sports entertainment, knew me in terms of something outside of what we're talking about today. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a little bit more famous in my community about other things.
You're very famous in your community. We love you here.
Yes, thank you. So I'm wondering, what in the world why are they hitting me up about this issue, a race issue, a hate issue? Why are they even hitting me up about this? White folks, right? Dominant community people. And I think Trevor Noah had the best answer for that. If you actually saw Trevor Noah talk through it in a long form, from home, Facebook Live type situation, I think he just said it the best. We're all stuck at home. People aren't seeing their family and friends. We're under this suspicious virus issue. The leadership doesn't know what to do. Whatever leadership you're talking about, local, medical, federal government, nobody knows what to do. Nobody knows how we're getting this thing and all that. Our kids are at home, right? My governor in South Carolina gave me a 1-day warning before I became a homeschool parent, And And I'm like, well, that was an adventure. All of a sudden it was like, well, I hope there's some educational stuff on Disney Plus, because I got stuff to do. I can't be sitting here all day with my kids. Who's supposed to take care of these kids? I thought the government was going to take care of it. All of our worlds were crazy and wrapped up in all this new stuff. And I think there's so many people, two things happened, I think. And one I didn't discover until very recently. One was our world was shaken up no matter who we were. And the second one, honestly, is what I started to realize after talking to a lot of people, especially in the DMs, right? People were hitting me up. I started educating some stuff through Instagram, through Facebook. And a lot of folks, I started to realize that the descendants of people who had personal racism going on in their lives, the descendants of those people, AKA the people I'm talking to right now today, they started to reveal to people of color, brown people, they started to reveal that I knew some of this was going on. Personally, I'm not racist, but I know that my parents were. I saw that happen in my community. And so they started to shift from this, I'm not racist, to I think I agree that there are systems that are racist. There are factors that have trickled down, and I know some of them, or I've seen them, or my friends, or whatever. And I think that was a big shift. And I don't think I even understood that coming from them as much, that the reason that I'm standing in solidarity with you is because I saw my grandma say stuff like that, whatever it was.
And I still benefit from those
right
systems.
and those types of things. So it's not that I'm not casting judgment. I'm not saying that these people knew what to do about it, but they were like, hey, so I think I agree that there are issues outside of personal racism that you're dealing with. And that was the big thing, because there were some people, of course, that were maybe coming to terms with this for the very first time, who were saying, hey, I always thought you guys in the minority culture were talking about personal racism. Well, I'm not racist. And I think they started to say, well, I think I'm starting to understand you're not talking about being personally racist, are you? And I'm like, if you are in my phone and my friend and calling me and texting me, no, I'm not talking about personal racism. We're friends. What I've been talking about, what we're seeing here, what we're lobbying against, hopefully, what we are marching for is systematic injustice and systemic injustice, not necessarily personal. Why? Because we're already neighbors and we're friends, or we're classmates. So if I can say one more thing, I'll also try to remind some of us that we've got to remember that I'm a 36-year-old man. I was born into a system where it was illegal to be racist in business, racist in the community. The Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, 64, 65 changed those things. But my grandmother, and many of you who are on the webinar today, were not born into that system. The system allowed for racism prior to that. And before 54, it allowed it in public school education, right? And of course, in places like the South where I live, it's not like there was integration immediately, and it's not like it came without protest from many people. But the system is different for my grandmother than it is for me, because she never went to school with a person of color, a white person. Some of you on this call, I would imagine, never went to school with a person of opposite race, black or white, right? And cousins and friends and parents grew up in that environment. So you've got to remember that when you talk about schooling and education, Nika, as you mentioned a little bit later, that I think a lot of our children or current community, including myself, I'm 36, doesn't understand, doesn't get it, because I never lived at a time where racism or systematic injustice or segregation was in public school. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. They told me that in the South, especially, that the civil rights was around, the Civil War was around states' rights. And I go, that's weird, because that's not what my mom said it was about. My mom said something different at home. My grandmother said something different. They look at the television at night on Fox and CNN and say something different than my teachers say, because my teachers were taught, or the curriculum or whatever says that they should say it this way. but it's not what we're all learning at home, at church, at the community center, at the sports team, no matter, you know, all these other places. So we've got to remember that there's a huge, not even just cultural issue there, there's a time issue. Time is different for people because of things like that. So I think you would agree with that. I saw some nods out there. If you hate everything I say, put it in the chat so I know. I'll just change it so you don't log off.
No, but the generational piece is so big. You're right. And as people grapple with how do we normalize this conversation of race and racism, you can't just think about it as a one-size-fit-all approach across the board, because to your point, JDew, there are generations right now to where their mindset and the paradigm that they have about this very broad, complex topic is different from those who are like part of the millennial or the generation, the iGen generation, you know, the Generation Zers. But one thing that you said that struck me, and I think it's worthy of amplifying, and these are my words, not yours, so I'm paraphrasing. While people may have been born into these systems, I always say you don't have to own the intent, but you do need to own the impact. And that's where I always like to make sure that people are understanding the reason that there needs to be this huge sense of ownership around how do we now change this and dismantle this systemic racism is because, again, there are communities, white communities, who are still benefiting from those systems. And so that in and of itself begs the question of why they need to own the impact. And so I think that's just important for us to continue to keep amplifying. So I want to keep going here. Just a quick question. We just lost John Lewis, legendary giant. I think you and I both agree with his sentiments of we need to get into some necessary trouble.
Good trouble. Good trouble.
Yeah, good trouble, necessary trouble. Is John Lewis on your list of someone to add to your one-man show?
That's a great question. From time to time, people ask me why I've chosen the men and women. I told you that several women that are in the show are videos, so they're actual testimonies of people. They tell their own long-form story, basically during the civil rights struggle proper. But I do men characters, male characters, you know, real people. And John Lewis, yes. So of course, when someone dies, we start to pay attention to what they say, right? Isn't that true across the board? MLK, Malcolm X, whoever it may be, right? And John Lewis is now. So he's on the top of my short list of people I'm doing more research on. Now, I knew about him and several things that he did because he's still active in, quote unquote, the struggle, getting himself into good trouble, arrested several times throughout his tenure as a senator. And of course, he was the youngest keynote speaker at the March on Washington. So he spoke. He was part of the student council of, forgive me, was it CORE at the time? Was he CORE, I believe?
Congress on Racial Equality. It's either 23 or 25, but yes, the youngest. Yeah.
Yep. So he spoke and did a keynote speech there for the weekend of March on Washington. He was part of the Freedom Rides, which I never learned about in school, which I learned completely from my own personal, you know, and show research. So anyway, so there are some, he's got a couple great speeches and two that I found so far that may end up in the show. We'll see. So I have to get rid of this beard to do it. Now, when I'm doing I look like the character, so I don't always have the beard when I'm doing it. All right, folks, this is the COVID beard.
So. We will look for some details around maybe John Lewis coming to the stage, whether it's virtual or to the live stage at some point in time as part of One Voice. So I want to shift gears now. There's still so much I want to cover, and I'm looking at the time and I'm going, gosh, okay. But I want to talk about family dynamics. Can you please share with us a beautiful picture of your family?
I will.
I want the community to see your cute kids because they're not there running around jumping on dad. And what would you like to say about your family before I go to my next question as we delve into now family dynamics?
Oh yeah, so much we can unpack here. You told me we'd talk about family. So can you guys see the picture there? Is it?
Yes, we can see it.
Wonderful. So the first thing I would say, I'm glad you asked that too. What should I say first? Well, first I would say that we only post the cute pictures for people on webinars. Okay, so any with pictures with poop going down the leg of my baby there, or anybody throwing up, we don't show those. So that's why they're cute, Nika. I'm reminding you, your kids are grown these days, but my kids are still in the house. All right.
No, so we love this. Okay, so I always like to ask questions about stories. I'm really big on storytelling as it relates to helping people to get proximate to the issues of those lived experiences that perhaps we just don't have a level of knowledge about, especially if we come from a place of privilege and it's not something we've ever been affected by. But is there a story or an experience that comes to mind for you as you have been navigating racism as a Black man, and specifically as a Black man in an interracial marriage with biracial kids? Let's talk about that.
Very interesting question, and I don't normally take it at home. I'm only doing this because Nika's asked me. So Dr. White is somebody I respect, but there are a lot of questions when we're navigating things in a very current cultural environment that are hard to answer. First thing that I will say that has been revelation to me happened when we had our local George Floyd and police brutality protest march. That's a picture from that. So it's almost 2 months ago now. And my daughter is 6. She is Johnny. We have Judah, who is 4, and the baby James is now 10 months. And we actually live in a community with where my in-laws live as well. So my wife's folks, they're white, of course, as you can see here. They came. So we all went down there. We actually went down there with separate intent. I was going to go by myself, but my in-laws wanted to come down and participate. It was also their anniversary. So they thought they'd go downtown. We could go together and participate, and then maybe go for ice cream for the kids or something. Well, I was going to do some rhetoric on the street with a camera, with a video, and it turned into something that got a lot of love on social media. And it was some Dr. King speech quotes. So I went there separate from my family. And this is what happened that just started to blow my mind. And what blew my mind was watching my wife and my in-laws talk through on an elementary level for my children what was going on as they participated in this protest march. Because for the very first time ever, in these very hands-on people, so my in-laws are hands-on, they live in our town, great people, but they're middle-aged white folks, nearing 60, I guess about 60 years old white folks, and my wife, who's 30. They were trying to explain to my kids who are participating, who are yelling things, who are trying to ask them, what's on that sign? What does that say? White people who love these kids are trying to navigate, trying to explain to these kids for the very first time in their white mind and white culture mentality, dominant culture mentality, trying to explain to a biracial kid, a Black kid, that many of us, that's how we grew up. If you were half Black, you were Black, right? So I'm not saying you are, I'm just saying that's how a lot of us think about it, right? They're trying to explain to them what's happening. And my kids are asking, well, why are we here? And what are they saying? And white people are explaining to Black kids what's going on. And they love these Black kids, and they start to be mentally distraught and concerned. I don't know how to explain police brutality to people of color to my grandkid who's Black. I've never thought about it that way. What if they have to deal with it? Is that why? And so they were doing all these mental jumping jacks, and we had some very great, close little come to Jesus moments as a family. 3 generations, because I kept asking my folks, you guys have never thought about this? They said, no. You guys have never, you didn't realize that maybe that, no, I didn't know how to, I don't know. I don't know what to say. And they're just sweating bullets, not because it's hot, because their mental issues are going through their head. So that's how it started for us. And that was a very significant moment. So I'll just say that as a story to kind of kick off maybe another question.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what conversations are you having with your kids these days? If you can unshare your screen so we can bring you back up fully.
Yes. So the first thing, So the first things that I will say, I'm coming from a basis, the humanity and the value of humanity for me and for my family, my wife, as well as my in-laws as well, comes from a place of value, comes from a place on a spiritual level. Other people cannot give us value. Mm-hmm. My perspective is that God has created me with value. So it doesn't matter what the laws say. It doesn't matter if your neighbor is mean or nice. That's the words you would say, age appropriately to your kids. Now, my kids are 4 and 6. They don't understand the words prejudice or racism so much. Whether someone's mean or nice, whether people like Black people or don't like Black people. That's how my daughter, who's 6, says things to me back and forth when we're talking through things. That doesn't change the way we should behave. We have value no matter what. God made you like this. God made you like this. So another thing that's very important in the way I do my rhetoric, online, in person, one voice community, or at home, is I started to have to realize and think about this sometimes, that when I'm upset about racial inequities, inequalities, and hate, and watching things in drive-throughs, where people are getting, I get upset. And of course, there's a personal, emotions that come out from some of these things sometimes. I've got to remember one thing, that my response to prejudice or racism cannot be prejudice or racism. And you know why? For me, it's on a different level than most of you who would probably agree with that statement. I shouldn't respond to hate with hate. Right. But I've got to be careful, because there's a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-month-old at home at my house who have a white mother. So I have got to be more careful about how I say things, or what I say or what I don't say, pros and cons or whatever. I can't commit sins of omission or commission, because I have to have a different standard. It can't be based on just Americanism. When I'm thinking about that as a person who's a follower of Jesus, I think about, well, Jesus wasn't even American, right? There's so many things to unpack there. So I have to think about this. I can't say that about white people because I'm married to a white person. You know what I'm saying? So there's so many things, Nika. And of course, there's one thing on an age appropriate level. This is the way God made you. This is the way God made me. This is who he wants you to be. This is how he wants me to act. And also coming under the submission that I'm not in charge. That's another big thing to help my kids understand. God doesn't want me to do that, or God doesn't want you to do that. So it's not just like my opinion. Like I tell them that I have a higher standard, and it's just not my emotion of the day. It's not based on what the president tweeted today. I have to be careful about how I respond, because I have to answer for the way I behave. And so do you. So you need to go to bed, stop getting out of the bed, and stop hitting your sister, go to sleep, right?
I love it. That's great. And I appreciate your comfort level in sharing with this community that, again, the authenticity around how you're having conversations in your house is very much guided by your faith and your belief. And I think that's the case for many of us, and we do have to make sure that we're intersecting a couple different aspects of our lives as we navigate the complexity of this conversation. And I love the fact that you have brought to light the need for the level of care in which, you said, I can't, how did you say it? You said, I can't commission it, but I also can't
omit it. Yeah, I can't
yes.
I can't, there's omission, things that I don't do that I should do, and commission, things that I do that I maybe shouldn't do, right? Those are both,
right.
That's why there's no right answer.
Yeah.
In a specific instance. We got to be careful. Like, I don't know. I'm out here making it up. Sooner or later, my kids are going to realize I'm out here making it up.
Yeah. And I often say that in our quest to try to be an ally and protect and help one group, we can't hurt another group. And so, and you have just emphasized the significance of that as a man who is, of course, part of this biracial family. And so I appreciate that coming out into our conversation. So I have so much more that I want to talk to JDew about, but I'm not going to be selfish. I am now going to open it up, because I'm sure that you all are just like me. You're sitting back and you're thinking, wow, I want to know more about this or that. So I want to get anyone who has interest in sharing with this community, either by way of contributing some insight, commentary, or specific questions for JDew, then unmute yourself right now and let us hear from you. Any questions right now at this time? And if you don't have any questions, I will certainly go back to the one challenge that I said we were going to all address together is, what do you need, or what should you do with your one voice? So
I will say, I think we've got one. I'll just say that in the chat there's a link. I assume that goes to the George Floyd thing that I did on the street that day. I'd highly encourage everybody to check that out. And you can also see if I'm any good at Martin Luther King as well, but that'll reference it.
Someone was starting to share. Go ahead.
Hey, Dr. White. First off, thank you. Jeremiah, this is Ken Baca, just taking a moment. Anna, thanks for putting the production together. So much great stuff to unpack in the discussion from obviously Congressman Lewis and the discussion around him, having the opportunity to listen to yesterday the eulogy, and you talking about potentially moving into what you do with one voice, black and blue. I recently had the opportunity to read Frederick Douglass, and I know he's part of what you do. What to a Slave is the 4th of July. So I don't know, I just wanted maybe if you could touch, if that's part of your show. And that was actually one of the speeches he did July 5th, not the 4th, in celebration, obviously, of independence. I think it was 73 years or something in that range after independence, but in 1852. And just, each of us starting to, I don't know if it's learn, but maybe relearn, better understand, and try to penetrate what we can individually do. So thank you for what you do with the community. And this is a great event you put on each week, Nika. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. Well, yes, I think maybe now you're seeing me doing a studio version of Frederick Douglass. So I was ready for that one. I had that picture ready. So thank you, Ken, for that. Yes, so I do, of course, I'm familiar with that speech. It's not the one that I do specifically today in my show when you're watching through it. And when you see me on stage today, I do the first chapter of Frederick Douglass's first autobiography. So the man was busy. Thank God to all of us 100 years, 125 years after his death or so, we have 3 autobiographies from one guy. And so the first chapter, the first autobiography is what I do. So it's, like I said, from memory. I come out dressed as him and I do that speech. And for those of you who are not familiar with Frederick Douglass, he was born on a plantation, enslaved in 1820s, did not know his birthday. We celebrated in February. His father was most likely his owner. Okay. He said he never knew his father. His mother died on a plantation when he was 7 years old. And he tells that story in his first chapter of his opening biography, coming to the knowledge that he's a slave. And isn't that a horrible way to have your first memories first off? Like coming to knowledge that there's a system that he lives into, because of course kids don't know, what they're born into. We don't choose all that. So his grandmother cared for younger women's children because she was too old for the field labor. So until the kids worked, they hung out with his grandma at the outskirts of the plantation in Maryland. He became a house slave. Okay, so we all know the difference between field and house. He became a house slave around, I guess, about 6 or 7. And he moved in the house. And that's where he realized that the system was messed up big time, because his aunt was also a house slave and she was abused verbally, sexually, everything else, emotionally by his owner. And that's when he realized what was going on, and he came of age at that point as a child. So he escaped from slavery and became a great orator, taught himself to read and write and became literate, was a very great speaker, and started touring the North after he ran away and it escaped, right, to the North. And he started giving lots of speeches, became Abraham Lincoln. He was on committees and was advising the president during the racial Civil War times and Reconstruction, all sorts of things. He gave a speech, if you're not familiar with it, of what is the 4th of July to a slave. Of course, in our founding documents, something that we talk about a lot now, we're all very familiar. Martin Luther King was bringing it up left and right in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, the documents say that we're all endowed by God as equal. He created us equal. You put it in the documents, and now you're stuck, America, because the founding documents say that we actually have rights as people, as citizens, as people worthy of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, let's jump back to the turn of the century, 1900, with Frederick Douglass. What is the 4th of July to a slave? You understand why Juneteenth was so much more powerful of an image and a celebration and a remembrance for Black people in that era, which maybe is coming back around, which hopefully is a good thing for all of our communities in 2020, because the 4th of July, freedom and choice and do what you want. What freedom became in this country for most of its history was the freedom to oppress. That's what it was. The freedom to oppress people of color, people, minorities, people you didn't like. The freedom to circumvent their neighborhoods, the freedom to not let them vote, the freedom to own them. You understand all these things. And so you understand that the Black minority, the mixed race narrative is just so different. It's just so different. I'm not saying necessarily right or wrong. So just think about that when Nika asked you about your one voice. Just understand how different it is at first, and then we can move forward. So first, let's listen and let's learn. And I believe we can make much better choices than have been made in America over 280 years.
Well stated, JDew. I want to go to Phil now. Phil has his hand raised, so Phil, please address your question.
JDew, thank you so much for the gift of your time and your stories today. This has been great. I mean, to see how someone else navigates the nuance and conflict, I think is a learning opportunity for all of us. And that's why I wanted to ask you to kind of reflect back on your recent conversation with the sheriff. I know that it invited a lot of community comment, and I'm just kind of curious, as you've had time to reflect and think about that, what would you say today about what happened there?
Yeah, it's very good. For those of you who don't know, we had that sheriff kind of 45 minutes to an hour session in One Voice Black and Blue. And maybe, Phil, you saw it. Thank you for jumping on. Recognize you there. Phil lives in my community. Good guy. And there was one basically controversial statement that has come up. And so I'll talk about that. But first, I'll say that the sheriff in our community, for any of you who are from this area or the county, very gracious man, did not know who I was when I asked him for an audience. I met him 5 minutes after I did that video clip on the street. So I was shooting with someone, and this girl who was my camera person knew the sheriff. I wouldn't have recognized him. She ran up to him as soon as we were done, said hello. He ran up to me, shook my hand. He was there on the street during the protest, standing at City Hall in downtown Greenville. Seemed like a very nice man. It was only 1 minute exchange, and she spoke to him for a while. Well, a few days later, I thought of the idea to sit down with him. I got his number through some folks, called him, waited a couple of days. He got back with me, sat down with me in our room to pre-record a day before the live event what we were doing. And I asked the sheriff, I said, hey, Sheriff, thanks for coming. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I do? Anything? He's like, no, I just thought I'd come, and I'm an elected official, so I'll have conversations when and where I can. I said, oh, great. Well, I do baseball and Clemson basketball and all. Oh, JDew. Oh, you're JDew. And I said, yeah. And we sat down and had a good talk. I sourced my questions from the community. As I mentioned earlier, we talked. It was a very good time. I'll be honest, most of what I do is historical, is entertainment value, is Black history. Half of what he said, because of what people sourced me to ask, was over my head. I didn't know. I didn't know everything. I wasn't there to comment, partially because I didn't know what they were. I didn't know everything. But it was good to chat with them. But here's what happened. There's been some things in our news locally in the last week where some folks who represent BLM, Black Lives Matter in our community, are upset about one of his comments. And his comment was basically, I think we can all agree that if George Floyd, the man in Minneapolis, and the man in Atlanta had not struggled, they'd be alive today. And what I learned from that more than anything was the power of your words and your one voice, even when you are trying to help, I guess you could say. You were trying to help and trying to smooth things over. I took what he was saying as a law enforcement opinion. I also took what he was saying in terms of a potential struggle and a resisting arrest prior to 8 minutes and 47 tragic seconds, of course. I didn't think that's what he was talking about. I didn't feel any personal, aggressive approach at all. You can see that in the video. And so what I learned there, and I think what the sheriff is learning now, we've since had 2 conversations in the last week when the news has reached out to both of us for better context, for links to what we did, to have the sheriff clarify or have him potentially come up with a new statement about what he said, is that the historical perspective of people of color, Black people, African Americans, Negroes, if you're that old, right? Historical perspective is so different. The bridge, when you start listening to people, the bridge may be wider than you expect. That is big, I would say. The bridge may be wider than you expect. That doesn't mean that it's not crossable. That doesn't mean that there's no bridge, but it may take you a lot longer to get across it than you were thinking. Yeah. And that goes for your neighbors, that goes for your community, that goes for your churches, that goes for your family members, and of course goes all the way up to federal government. But don't start there. Start with your neighbors. Start with your sheriff. Start with your kids, your family members.
Love that. That's where we have the influence, right? So start where we have the influence and let that give us momentum and traction to be able maybe to go after some loftier goals. But I love that. There's lots of great stuff happening in the chat. People are sharing how they plan to use their one voice. And so we do have a few moments left. Are there any other questions, or would someone like to share vocally with this community how you plan to use your one voice?
Well, my name's Natasha Pauling, and I just wanted to ask you, well, I grew up Black and blue because my father and now 4 generations of people in my family are in law enforcement. At the same time, I came to a solemn recognition that their lives were being put in danger, not just because of the difficult work that they do, but also because of the work that some other people were doing in a way that does not serve the community. And so I've been saying for at least 10 or 15 years that we had to resolve this violence issue, this overuse of force issue, because it placed officers in danger. I don't think that I'm saying anything different than I was saying before, but I do believe that people are listening now. And so I want to know from your perspective, what is the difference that you've seen now that people are listening to you and allowing you to finally use your voice to be heard and not just to start an argument?
That question is directed to me or Nika? Okay, all right,
well,
here we go. You guys are getting me. Okay, so yes, I will say that honestly, the very first thing, this got actually mentioned in the and maybe in the notes, Nika, I'll send you the link to the sheriff conversation. Maybe you can share it with folks in the recap.
Yeah, we will.
As well as some other things that we're mentioning, maybe. Here's the biggest thing that I'm understanding for the very first time. I'm 36 years old. I have a personality that is, hopefully most of you agree with, is not very confrontational, is a jovial guy. People like me in my community for fun stuff that I do. And I was able to bridge that gap and do something on my own, like this one-man show that asked better questions of race relations. And then people really respond to it. About 52,000 people maybe have seen it over the course of 10 years, I think. And it's a great conundrum that the world sometimes in the media doesn't know how to answer. What about minorities who are in law enforcement, right? What about lesbian, immigrant, conservative people, whatever, right? All these things are like, I thought these had to be opposite. And that's not true. The biggest thing, first off, I want to say again, and you'll see this in the conversation that I had on the street doing George Floyd MLK, is you need to check in with your own neighbors. Instead of blasting on social media, check in with your own kids. You know how many kids that are my age and above, kids have checked in with me in the last couple months to say, you know, I don't know how to handle my mother, my parents, because people aren't checking in with their own neighbors. Check in with your family. At the beginning of COVID, we were supposed to go check in with our elderly, our frail, our fragile neighbors to see how they were doing. Well, that's how we get community. Go check in with the people who need you, who are close to you first. Right? I've probably tweeted some crazy things or said a few crazy things about our current president, as many of you probably have all sorts of opinions. And you know how many of his tweets, my tweets, he's read? 0. But, you know, I did check in with my sheriff and we had a great conversation. So here's what I would say to the thing that you're asking about in these relations is we are coming to terms more and more with like an aggressive defensive approach with law enforcement. How can we solve these problems? Which is politics, right? How do we solve these problems? That's politics. We all have different opinions there. But a huge thing that I've really seen start to change the world is how many people of majority dominant culture are listening. They weren't listening to me in the last 2 months to respond. They were just listening. And at the end of me saying something, or end of sitting still and listening to Frederick Douglass say something, or MLK say their whole bit, their whole spiel, people started, you can see it in their face. The reason that they're not responding is because they're thinking. And that's what we all need to do. I need to do the same thing. I can talk all day. I'm an MC, I'm a host. But when I listen to people for a long time with no intent to response, or they give me new information, I'm sitting here trying to make a new decision, right? New information allows us to make new decisions. Well, let's allow new information to get in our heads. We can make better decisions for our neighborhoods, our families, our communities. So that's where I would think, I think that the narrative is going to, I think the policy in a lot of places is potentially going to change with law enforcement, even if it's long, and I don't know everything. I told you earlier, I'm not a pro in law enforcement relations, is people are listening though. And they're allowing people to talk, you know, majority, minority, blah, blah, blah. They're all doing it. And if we can keep doing it, if we can hold on to that, just like the founding fathers said, if we can hold on to this republic thing we put on paper, we're going to have something different. We can hold on to it. We don't know if we can. We wrote it down and it looked good, but I think the British are coming over in some ships right now. And they're about to shoot us. All right. So, but if we can hold it, things are going to be special.
I love this. We're at the top of the hour, and I am saddened by that because I feel like this conversation can just continue. It's been so rich, and I'm so grateful, JDew, that you accepted my invite to come and share with this community. And I'm so grateful for each of you that show up week after week, or whenever your schedule permits you to show up. It causes me to feel seen, valued, and heard, and I don't take that for granted. I want to give you the last words, and so I'm going to put you on the spot, or maybe not, and give you maybe 60 seconds. And I want you to give us maybe just a clip of whatever it is that you want to leave this community with. Maybe it could be from your One Voice show, or even just some words of inspiration as we continue to try to instill hope. Whatever it is, I want to give you the last 60 seconds. Share.
Okay. I'll say a few final things from Dr. Martin Luther King as we all navigate what we should do moving forward. In his final address to people, April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, he said these things, you know, I'm so glad that I was around here in 1960, 1961, 1962, and 1963, when we decided to take a ride for freedom and end segregation through interstate travel. I'm so happy that I was around in 1963 when I tried to tell America about a dream that I had had. I'm so happy that I was here at that time in Memphis, Tennessee, seeing the community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. It's so important to understand his words here that he said at the end. I'm not scared of anything. I've gone up to the mountain and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight as a people, we will get to the promised land. And so I'm happy tonight. At all the problems and all the drama, I'm happy. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Continue to have hope, just like John Lewis told us. Continue to have hope, get yourself in good trouble, and never stoop so low to another man as to never let them make you stoop so low as to hate them. Thank you, Dr. White, for having me on, and I appreciate all of you who stayed with me. And paraphrase that last 60 seconds there a little bit. Would love to connect with you later. LinkedIn, Jeremiah Dew, as you see on my screen, at It's JDew, ITSJDEW, most everywhere else on social, and use your one voice.
Use your one voice. Fantastic. Thank you all. You have a great weekend. Hopefully we'll see you back here next Friday, where my special guest co-host is Victoria Russell, who joined us today. Thank you, Victoria, the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for Papa John's. And so another great conversation. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, JDew.